started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this session. I'm David McIntyre, and I'm so glad that you've joined us for Foundation 4 of our From Anxiety to Offer series, where we've been talking about um, some of the critical pieces to the interview process that may have tripped you up, or maybe you didn't understand or know up front, but are a critical piece of the puzzle to help you win the interview. Because our ultimate goal is to make sure that you win every time. So, with me today to do that, I've got the illustrious Lynn Nestor, and
Hi.
then I've also got Rosetta McDowell with me as
Hello,
well,
everyone.
and the three of us are going to chat through this with you. Typically, if you have a question, just feel free to throw that question in the chat. You can find the chat on, I believe, the right hand side of your screen, and you can type in and do your thing and send us a note. We'll also potentially ask you a few questions throughout the session. You can answer it right there in the chat. All right. So today we're going to be talking about reading the room, but just to be fair, we've been talking about these we're in 4 of 5 sessions. We started by talking about from anxiety to confidence. And we talked about how, there's a great book out there called The Anxious Generation.
Mhm.
And that book talks a bit about why and how this current generation, Gen Z, is so anxious. And some of the data out there, some of the surveys that say when it comes to the interview process, Gen Z is extremely anxious. So we began to deal with that. And we realized that the answer to anxiety when it comes to the interview process is preparation. Then we moved on to foundation 2, which is asking the question about what interviews measure. And in that session, we talked about some of the secret questions, and I wouldn't call it secret so much as I would say the quiet questions that your interviewer is trying to answer about you in the background. They want to know, can they trust you? They want to know if you can represent the company well, and what kind of management load will you be? Will you be a difficult management load, or will you be an easy management load? So they're evaluating these things, and as always, they're talking about and thinking about the concept of risk assessment. They're not saying you're the most amazing person. They're not saying you're so qualified. The reality is that most people who apply for a job and get an interview are qualified. The question is, what level of risk of hire are you for the organization? And then we switched over to the translation gap in section 3, because the way that you determine or you show that you are low risk and high effectiveness is how you communicate. And so many times Gen Z uses casual talk, they use slang. Not only is their verbal language, but their body language communicates something that oftentimes interviewers misread. And so there's a translation gap between what you say and what your interviewer hears. And so we talked about the PAR process, the PAR framework, which is problem, action, and result. And we talked about using that framework and the concept of storytelling to be able to communicate to an interviewer your particular story, or not only just your story, but the answers to their questions that they're asking you. And to be able to put them in that framework helps you to be able to clearly and concisely not only speak their language, but speak their language in a way that they not only understand, but now can use to evaluate where you are in the process as they're determining what level of risk you are and whether they can trust you, you'll represent them well, and that you'll be a low management load. Now, today we're in Foundation 4, which is reading the room. And let me tell you, reading the room is, if I'm being honest, it's something that is difficult to teach in one sense. But let me tell you, once you learn how to read a room, It's like having a superpower, and it's going to help you to see and do things that other people can't do, not only in the interview, but in other areas of life, whether it's in the meeting room, whether it's in contract negotiations, salary negotiations, anything like that that comes up because you walk into a room and you're able to quickly discern what's going on around the room. So that's where we are, and that's what we're going to kick off into today. Lynn and Rosetta, any thoughts before we get going?
I think you've set a great foundation.
Great. So here we go into this learnable skill. So let's start with what reading the room actually looks like. And I think, well, I'm going to give you two options, two ways to see it. I'm going to share a video with you right now. And it's from one of, I know I'm a dude, so it's from one of my favorite movies, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Yes, not the Oscar winning film that you may have been expecting. But in this movie, there is a scene that happens in the elevator. And we see Captain America doing something that we may not have realized before, but we can now realize is that he's reading the room. Let me show it to you, and then we'll come right back in.
Operations Control.
Strike personnel on site.
Yes, sir.
Forensics. Cap.
I'm low.
Now watch what happens in the elevator.
Our evidence response found some fibers on the roof they want us to see. You want me to get the TAC team ready?
No, let's wait and see what it is first.
Right.
Boom. Hmm.
Sorry about what happened with Fury. Messed up what happened to him. Thank you.
Mm. Mm.
Records.
Now that he's read the room,
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
okay, I'll leave the rest of that for you to see in your own time, the thrilling ending of the elevator fight. But there's something here that we see Captain America doing. The first thing we see him doing is we see him take sorry about that. We see him taking the opportunity as he gets into the elevator. He has no expectation that anything is going on. However, when people start coming into the room, he begins that there are other things that are happening around him. And he begins to notice as somebody else gets in the elevator, he sees his hand on the gun. As somebody else gets on, we see sweat coming down his brow. That's odd. Then we see the big dudes get on the elevator. That seemed odd as well. And it led him to the point where he says, now that he's read the room, he now knows he has to take action. And so he invites anybody to get off who wants to, because he's about to kick butt. And that's really a very interesting but strong visual picture of what it means to read the room. I'll give you another analogy. reading the room is like reading a book. See, when you read a book or you read a text, it doesn't matter. When you're reading, typically, you understand that when you're going through the process of reading, that a period communicates stop, that a comma is a pause, and depending on what's happening on the front side of that comma, it may determine the tension that's in that part of the book that you're reading. Depending on the end of the sentence, it could be a question mark at the end, which means could mean lean in more. It could mean something strange is happening, a question's being asked, and it's a why. But what we do know is that when we're reading, we've learned to understand these grammatical tools, these grammatic tools that help us to further understand what's being said and to gain context from what's being said as well. In the same way that we read a book, we read a room. Now, here's the thing that I want to set out for you right from the beginning. When you first started learning how to read, you didn't just pick up a book and get going. You began to learn letters, and then you began to put sounds together, and then words, and then multiple words, and then sentences of words. A lot of times there was pictures that were connected with words and sentences that helped to create more context for you. But then over time, you began to read, and not only to read, but read and understand what it was that you're reading. I want you to know that reading the room is the same concept. You haven't necessarily practiced a great deal about reading the room, but as you practice it and use it daily, you become more proficient in it. And the more proficient you become in it, the greater you're able to walk into a room and quickly assess what's going on, what the mood is, and maybe how you should talk, because the whole purpose of reading the room is to help you to discern how you should approach that room. It doesn't matter if it's a meeting room. It doesn't matter if it's an interview. It doesn't matter if it's, again, a contract meeting or a salary discussion. Being able to read the room is like having a superpower. It gives you an edge over other people who have not practiced the concept of reading the room. So I want to bring you a tool that's going to help you read the room. And I'm going to not only show you what these steps are in this process, but we're also, after the session's over, we're going to send out a guide to you called the 10-second scan. And it's the 10-second scan to reading the room. And so we're going to walk through it here in just a moment, but we're going to show you what it means to step into a room, and within 10 seconds, a lot of you will eventually learn to do it faster. Initially, you won't do it as quick as 10 seconds, but you want to be able to, within 10 seconds, be able to identify the general mood, energy, vibe in that room and be able to know how to govern yourself at that moment. The other thing that's important about reading the room, before I show this to you, and you're going to hear us say this repeatedly in this session, is that reading the room is not something you do once and you're done. You walk into a room and you get a sense of how everything is at the beginning. But things shift and change. The energy shifts, the vibe shifts in the room when things are happening in the meeting. And you want to constantly be reading the room because you want to stay the most equipped person in knowing how to respond and react in that room. Lynn and Rosetta, what feedback or other additional pieces do you have about reading the room?
It is a tool that you can transfer everywhere you go. You're going to be able to use it, family situations particularly, say when the big family gets together. A lot of us look for our safe space, and reading the room lets you see where your safe space is, much the way Captain knew this isn't safe for me. You'll look around and you'll recognize the different tools, how people sit. You're going to talk about their posture, all of the things that are going to help you get to the place where you know you need to be.
So I would like to add to that, Lynn, that you are so right that these things happen in regular everyday settings, right? But when you're coming into an important meeting like an interview, you really want to be able to have a sense of, maybe even what the interviewer may have just encountered before you walked in, or what the mood is for the interviewer. Um, so I think you're right on about that.
And one of the things, let's just go ahead and get started and talk about that. Before you ever enter a room, you're going to need to take a moment to look around. You don't rush into that area. You go ahead and you look around and see what's going on. Pause in the doorway. Take a breath before you go on, especially if you're on Zoom. But before you enter that room, walk in and pay attention. Something's about to happen in here, and that brief second to calm yourself, because by nature, interviews are something that cause us to feel a little uncomfortable. Just take that breath before you move forward. And then
Yes.
the next thing you're going to do is you're going to observe the mood. Now, this is going to take you 2 seconds. So we've already used 3 of our 10 seconds. And you're going to say, what energy is happening here? Is it quiet? Is it energetic? Is it serious, casual? Is it tense, relaxed, focused, or distracted? Get a sense of what's going on there so that emotionally you can determine, is the emotional climate is more important than just saying, wow, it's loud in here. Make a mental note of what's happening and what's going on. Are they busy? Are they excited about something? And you can figure out what you may need to do.
Yeah.
You're going to look at the nonverbal cues as well as the physical cues, non-physical, all of it. What's the body language? If I'm sitting back like this, is a completely different message to you than if I'm leaning in and say, hey, tell me a little more about yourself.
Right.
Pay attention to those things. Are my arms crossed? Am I open to hearing what you have to say? Am I looking at you, or I'm focused on the material that I've got down in front of me and saying, hey, have a seat? All of this is going to give you a picture of what you can expect there. Facial expressions, interested, stressed, confused, relaxed, all of it helps you set the stage for what's about to go on there. Rosetta,
That's so
David?
true. So true, Lynn. I was as as you were talking, that's just human nature, right? Whatever is going on with us outside of those walls, it comes inside with us sometimes, and we just can't help that. So one example maybe of what you were talking to, if I may offer an example, is you walk into an interview and the room is completely silent. Everyone's looking at their papers. That's a serious focused mood. But when you walk into a room, if everybody's kind of light and they're chatting and they're talking or laughing about something that's going on in the office, that's a lighter mood. And you can adjust your entrance and your personal introduction based upon that. What do
Mhm,
you think, Lynn?
mhm.
Yeah, that's really good, Rosetta. We sorry for the little technical glitch that I had there. We're pulling up some other pieces. One of the things I want to point out to you is we talked about the example of reading the book. And I want to give you a couple of comparisons. We mentioned the comma. A comma in an interview is when the interviewer checks their watch. It's like a pause or a tighten up. When you have a period in an interview, that means stop. You've said enough. When you come up to a question mark, when you're talking about an interview and reading the room, that means your interviewer is probably leaning forward. They want some more. They're curious or interested in what you're saying. And then if you have an exclamation point in that interview, suddenly, and your interviewer suddenly gets animated, there's a bit of an energy shift in the room. And so you're going to have to figure that one out just a little bit to see whether that's a positive energy shift or whether that's a negative energy shift. All right. So now let's put ourselves in position and let's take a look at these 6 steps in the 10-second scan. And let's understand what each one of them means. Len kind of went through just really quickly some of those pieces, but now we'll look at some others. Give me just a moment to pull that up. All right, here we are with our deck. Okay, give me just one moment here. Lynn, are you able to pull the deck up if you you click the share button?
Let me see if I can. Give me a moment. Did that bring it to you?
There we go. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we need to move forward.
Yep. So let's look at the 10-second scan. All right. The quick overview of the 6 steps in the 10-second scan are these. Stop before entering the room. 2, observe the mood. 3, look for nonverbal cues. These are typically nonverbal physical cues. Scan for social dynamics. Number 5, listen before you speak. And number 6, adjust your approach. So let's look at step 1 before you enter the room. Number 1, if you're like me, I'll move into a room pretty quickly because there's a meeting, there's something going on, and I usually, just being David, will bust through the door and find my seat and then move on accordingly. But that might not be the best approach. Sometimes it's good to not rush in, but take a beat before you cross that door path. If you're in person, pause at the doorway. But if you're on Zoom, take a breath before you've gone into the meeting. Before you unmute yourself, take a breath. And what this does is it signals to your brain that you're paying attention. You're connected, you realize where you are, what's going on, and things are okay. The next thing we want to do is observe the mood. What's the energy like in the room? Is it a quiet energy or is it energetic? Are people very serious or are they casual? Are they tense or is it relaxed? These are all important things to figure out because if it's quiet, serious, and tense, something heavy may be about to go down and you might need to be prepared for that. But if there's a nice energy in the room, people feel pretty relaxed and casual, then that means that you can go ahead and approach this room a little differently and you can match that mood and you'll probably be in a very similar or good position. But what you're checking for is you're looking for the emotional climate in the room. You want to have a feel for how everybody else is doing in the room and where you should approach and enter in that room. So as I said, the example is silent room, serious mood, adjust. Because you might be popping in ready to just bounce off the walls and be like, hey, everybody, how you doing? But that is not the mood of the room. So you have to adjust in the process. Let's take a look at our step 3 in the process, which is begin to look for your nonverbal cues. Now, what do we mean when we say nonverbal cues? We're talking about physical cues. We're talking about things that nobody says, but there's an expression on somebody's face. Somebody's tapping their pencil nervously on the table. There's a sense that there's just a anxiety, a lot of wiggling and just moving in the chair that says everything's not casual and light here. And or just the opposite. It could be a lot of just I hate to use this word because it's an old word, frivolity in the in the room where people are light and happy. There's a lot of bouncy movement around. People are chatting with one another. There's a lot of turning into one another versus just a straightforward focus. Those are the kinds of things you want to look for. Are they leaning in or are they leaning back? Are their arms crossed or are their arms open? What kind of eye contact is happening? Or are people looking away from one another? What kind of facial expressions? Do people look confused? Do they look interested? Do they look stressed? These are all the things that you're looking for in this room as nonverbal cues to give you a cue about how to approach the room. Step 4 is to scan for the social dynamics. So look around the room as you're looking, what's happening socially? Is there one conversation going on or are there multiple conversations? Who's leading and who's quiet? Now remember, this is both when you first walk in the door, but this is also as you're in the room and you're watching this meeting or this, in your case, this interview unfold. Who's quiet? What's the power structure in the room? And that's an important question. And Lynn's going to talk about that in a little bit. But the power structure in the room is important. And an example that, you may have, you may be going before a panel for your interview. And when you go before a panel for your interview, it could be that the two interviewers are talking to one another. If they're engaged in conversation, is that the opportunity for you to interrupt, or should you hold back and wait to be acknowledged? You got to read that room and determine which is the most appropriate. And a lot of times the most appropriate is to wait until you're acknowledged because they may be communicating something back and forth between themselves. Step 5 in this process is to listen before speaking. Look at this. Even if you think you understand, still listen. I've heard people say all my life, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And you want to use those 2 ears as much as possible because what you hear in those 2 ears will inform what comes out of your mouth. And so you want to be thoughtful of that. Did you walk into something important where people are already talking and having a conversation about something? 2-second listen. The 2-second listen prevents 2-week reputation problem. I have unfortunately and embarrassingly so been on the wrong side of this. I've been in the position where I thought we were having a meeting on a phone call. And during that call, I kind of just jumped in and I started sharing some negative stuff about a client of ours with no idea that client was on the phone and there was already a conversation happening. I was so embarrassed. I couldn't believe that I'd gotten caught flat-footed like that. And then I had to figure out how to recover, which Rosetta's going to talk about in a little bit. For me, that recovery was humor because that's a natural slant for me. And I lean into that when I've messed up. And so I was able to humor my way back out of that situation, but I should have never been in that situation. And if when I'd gotten on the call, I'd just been quiet for a minute and listened to what was going on, I would have not only had context for the conversation, but I would have also known that that client was on the phone and I would not have made that mistake. So, if nothing else, learn from the fool who went before you and has already done that thing. And then step 6 in the process is learn to adjust your approach. So, based upon what you've observed, what's the right tone for how you speak in this room? What's the right volume? What's the right timing? What's the right pacing? Engage intentionally and not impulsively, like I did in that example I gave you. I engaged impulsively. There was nothing intentional about my approach except to wear that client out for what I thought was mistreatment. And then now that I've gotten all that information and I'm ready to talk, now I'm ready to actually engage in this room. Think back to that Captain America clip. When he saw the gun grab, he saw the sweat on the brow, he saw all of the people that were amassing on the elevator, with the final touch being the big guys. He now had enough information and he knew how to govern himself in that elevator situation. And you want to be able to do the same thing in your interviews. Rosetta, anything or Lynn, anything to add to that before we go on? All right. That just means I did a perfect job, everybody. Thank you very much. So now let's take it another step here. And let's just remember this thought. Reading the room is ongoing. It's not a one-time thing. So in other words, that when you begin to read the room, we just gave you the initial walk in the room, but you're going to be running through that process the entire time that you're in that room, because something's going to happen. You're going to get a sense that something has shifted, and that shift may cause you to change your approach in the conversation. Sometimes it may make you maybe back up a little bit and try to understand more what's going on. It might push you to be more emphatic about your points that you're making, or it may let you recognize that, oh, I haven't been very clear here. Let me work to be more clearer in this communication. And the reason why it works is that it's a skill that you can learn. It's not magic. It's not a personality trait. It's actually a learnable skill that anybody can learn and take away and go and do, and over time become super skilled in it in a way that other people will not do. All right. Now, I want to invite you, if you're in one of the rooms, whether on LinkedIn, YouTube, or right here in StreamYard, feel free to use the chat to ask any questions that you may have. I'll either tackle them in the moment or I'll tackle them when we do a Q&A at the end of the session. So let's look at our next piece and let's talk about the signals. We call it the punctuation marks, the pacing that happens throughout this process. So number one, when we're talking about, we want to talk about pacing and energy. And again, remember, if it's fast, if the interviewer is going quickly and kind of driving things along at a fast pace, you want to be able to tighten up your answers. If the interviewer is moving slower, then feel free to slow down a little bit and to match their pace. I think that one of the key things that I've learned over time that I think will be beneficial to you is that as you walk into a room and you begin to have a conversation with an interviewer, you always want to match their pace and take it with them so that they feel that you guys, it's a way of feeling connected with your interviewer, that you're not moving faster than them, you're not going slower, but things are moving along at a nice pace that they set for you. Lynn, how about tone and formality?
Tone and formality are huge. Um, when you are walking in someone's office into a room for an interview, you listen to see, are they speaking formally, very professionally? Hello, Ms. Nestor, have a seat. Or are they, hi, I'm John. Lynn, would you like to have a seat, please? That gives you a clue about the formality and how they're going to be talking with you. Are they using technical language? Are they keeping it very simple? Do they make jokes or stay very serious? All of this is going to give you a clue of how you need to respond. You want to be more professional and mirror what they do, whether it's formal or casual, but particularly if it's formal. If it's a casual, you can relax a bit, you can be a little more conversational, little laugh. For instance, if they say, how's it going? You can come in and say, it's going well. I'm excited to be here. If they're, well, how are things, Ms. Nestor? I'm doing well, thank you. It's all in how you're going to mirror and do those things with the person that you're speaking with. They're the ones assessing if you're going to fit into that organization, and that's why they're in that position.
Thanks, Lynn. Let's talk about the next one, which is body language. When we talk about, we want to talk about the concept of, are they leaning in, which means they're engaged, or are they leaning back, which means they're disengaged? And you can look for variations of that. If they lean back and over to the side of their chair, that could mean something. So you just want to be looking at what their body language is telling you. Does somebody, kick their feet out and cross them in front of you? And the same is true. Don't miss the Zoom part of this, because you'll still see on Zoom the same body language, the same verbal cues that will help you to understand how to govern yourself. And number 4, Rosetta? You're muted, Rosetta.
I do apologize for that. We want to talk about questions asked and what you can gain, how it can help you to read the room even further by the questions that are asked. Is the interviewer asking follow-up questions or moving on quickly? Are they asking about specific dates, times, incidents, and so forth? Are they staying at a high level? If they're staying at a high level, that means they're asking more closed-ended questions, right? Are they asking behavioral questions, or are they just checking the boxes? For example, you mention a project to the interviewer, and the interviewer immediately asks, what was your specific role? If that happens, then you are to respond quickly. The pace is, okay, now I want you to think on your feet. The pace is a little faster. This is what all this means. Follow-up questions equal interested, and they want you to elaborate more. Moving on quickly equals not hooked yet. They're not really fully there with you. So keep your answers concise and to the point.
Fantastic, Rosetta. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to another big section. And I said we were going to talk about it a little bit earlier. And it's the concept of power dynamics in the room. And I'm going to let Lynn explain that and talk through a little bit about those power dynamics.
Okay, would you go ahead and pull up the slide? Whoops. With power dynamics, we all know that there are power dynamics. It's the thing where you walk in a room, you're a little uncomfortable because they have a job you're interested in having. So you recognize that they have the power, you don't. And that's what we talk about when we have power dynamics. One of the things that we need to look at is, how do you navigate it without being passive or pushy or losing yourself in your trains of thought? Because sometimes that happens as well. You get in your head and don't really communicate what you want to say. Here's the framework to follow. First, let them lead. They set the agenda. They know the things they want to ask you. So let them lead in that and ask the questions. And then when they are finished asking questions, they typically will turn it over to you for you to ask the questions you have. Answer their questions with the opportunity for them to be able to go forward in that. When it's time that they have asked you a question, but you feel like you have more information, you've answered it, but you have more information, ask permission to elaborate. Would it be helpful if I elaborated on that? Would you like to know more about it? May I walk you through the details? All of those things will allow you to be able to move forward with more information in a very respectful way, recognizing the power that they have. Respect their time. If they start checking the clock, give a shorter or a briefer answer. If they're engaged, that typically gives you the ability to expand more on what you're doing. And then be very professional, be very respectful, don't overstep. By that, I mean, don't interrupt them. Don't take over the conversation. And these are a lot of don'ts, but it boils down to allow them to direct the interview, like we said at the beginning, allow them to direct the conversation, expand when you've got permission to do so, and keep on topic unless they give you the opportunity in a question such as, are there other things that you would like to share with us that we haven't talked about yet? And then there's going to be that time when you have to adapt versus when you hold firm. We talked a little bit about that the last time. You should adapt their pace. If they're speaking quickly, speak quickly with them. If they are speaking slowly, don't rush your answers. Match the tone. Are they professional? Are they casual? So match that tone and that level of language with them. Give more or less detail based on what the question. When someone says, tell me about a situation, or how did you feel when? I felt good. It was a good situation. When they say, tell me about, they're asking you to give them a fuller story. And then mirror their enthusiasm or their seriousness. You could find it different in different departments in the same company. If you're in the marketing department, they could be a lot more friendlier and outgoing. If you're going into the accounting department, they could be more serious. That's not a rule of thumb that you should always expect, because that accounting manager could be a very open, fun person, and they would want you to mirror them there as well. They want to know that you're a good fit. The other thing that you should not change, because that's just as important, you're not to change your values, your honesty, your boundaries, or who you are, your core identity. Authenticity is huge. You're looking for a job as well. You want to see if this job is a good fit for you. If any of these jobs require you, or any of these interviews require you to adjust who you actually are, presses in on the boundaries, that's a good clue that it's maybe not a job designed for you. There would be another one, and don't sweat it. You're there to learn. Don't ignore the content. It means adjust your delivery. Don't compromise who you are. So being authentic, adjust your delivery, but don't adjust who you are. Those are the main points for the power dynamics and how you operate in an interview.
Lynn, I really like that you brought out the part about being authentic and not adjusting who you are. No one should require you to be someone that you're not, to be considered for a job. And I believe that that's who you want to put your best authentic self forward. Right. So I think that's a really good point that you brought out.
And that reminds me, I'm sorry, David.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I would say that reminds me of a friend that we worked with, and she would always say, bye, Tass. Be your true, authentic self. And that's what the interviewer is looking for, your true, authentic self.
And I think we're gonna do a side session at some point about bite testing, because we have to balance in an interesting way, as Lynn kind of mentioned. It's always great to be your true authentic self. Just remember where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's being your true authentic self within the confines of a professional environment. So being your true authentic self isn't saying, the vibe in your office is totally, that was so 80s and 2000s mixed together. But it's just this sense of going slang. Uh, Even though you may talk to your friends that way, you just have to realize that in a professional environment,
Mm-hmm.
you don't approach customers nor your boss in the same way that you would your friends. And you have to realize two different environments require two different versions of yourself, but neither one of them is not authentic. They're just what's required for that environment. And you want to be fully and wholly yourself. Thanks, Lynn, for that session. Rosetta, why don't you talk to us about the concept of recovering like I needed to when I completely missed it?
Well, the best of us, David, have to know how to recover. It's still a skill that I am learning to hone myself. We want to, in this section, to give you specific language for when you misread a room or for when you make a mistake. Okay, so real talk. You're going to misread the room. We all do. So let's talk about what happens or what to do when that happens. So here's a scenario. You enter a room, you sit down for the interview, you're asked a question. It could be as simple as, how are you today? But you begin to ramble. You're mid-answer and you realize you've been talking too long. That period, remember the period David was telling us about? It just shows up maybe as a big sign in your mind. It's time to just cut that off. But the way that we can recover is, let me bring myself back to the main point. Then summarize in one sentence. Let's get that done. So an example of that could be, sorry, I'm getting into the weeds. Let me bring myself back. The key result was we reduced onboarding by 10%. So that's an example of you pause, as Lynn talked to us about taking a breath, a pause, and then you bring yourself back and you answer the question quickly. Another scenario is you go blank. Are there those of you with us today that have gone blank in mid-sentence sometimes? You're given a delivery, you're given an answer on something, and you go blank. You forget what you were saying mid-answer. So here's an example of a recovery. Let me think about that for a second. You take a pause, then either you consider or you ask them to repeat the question. When they repeat the question, that gives you an opportunity to have a moment to gather your response again. So an example of that would be, you know what? Let me make sure I'm answering what you are actually asking. Could you repeat that question, please? So that's just another scenario. A final scenario would be, you completely misread the room. You did not do like Captain America. You completely misread the room. You gave a detailed answer when they wanted something brief, or vice versa. The recovery could be, would more detail be helpful here? Or you can ask them, should I just move on? Well, you don't want to say just move on, but you may say, should I move on? Okay. An example could be, I can walk through the technical details if that would be useful to you, or I can jump to the outcome, which would be helpful. So you're asking them, you're getting clarity on what it is they're exactly wanting from you so that you can answer the question to their satisfaction. Are you there, David?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry about that. I'm the fabulous switching David today.
One other scenario would be that the interviewer seems disengaged. The interviewer, you're sitting there, you're in the interview, and it seems the interviewer has completely checked out. Stay professional. And there, you just stay professional, and you just give them a moment. Maybe you pause, because they're looking at their cell phone, they're checking their notes, they're not making eye contact with you. So this is an opportunity for you to actually help the process along. You remain professional. Tighten your answers. Wrap up cleanly. An example of this would be that, you can tell that they've got something to do, and you can say, well, that would be, you could say, that's the end of my response, or let them know that you've come to the conclusion of your response so that, they can then go ahead and either release you or come to the end of their questioning. What not to do. Don't call it out. Don't ask them if you're losing them. You just pause. You just sit nicely. And eventually they will come to realize that, oh, okay, someone's sitting in front of me. The key to recovery: composure matters more than perfection. Remember that. Composure matters more than perfection. So you may not get it right. You might misread the room. You might ramble. You might experience some of these things we talked about in the scenarios. But just keep your composure, bring yourself back, and I think that will help you to always recover well.
Thanks, Rosetta. That's good. Composure is key, and it's key throughout your professional career, because you notice in that huge mistake that I made by jumping in on that call and adding my 2 cents in when it wasn't asked for, was I did not lose my composure. I didn't go, oh God, who heard that? Oh, geez, help me. I just simply said, there comes a time in a boy's life where he just makes a mistake. And I just started into this whole spiel about a politician and, how politicians are, and doing some other things that helped me ramble myself out of the bad place that I was in. But I never once lost composure, because the moment you lose composure, you lose a bit of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, Lynn? You lose a bit of control over the situation, and even with yourself.
And you also lose credibility.
Yes, very much so. So you want to keep composure. All right, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and as we wrap up, I want to ask if you've got any questions in the room. Please feel free to drop those in the chat. Also, I want to give you some homework to do. As I said, we're going to send to you the 10-second scan. It's a great guide. I'm going to send 2 things to you. I'm going to send you a 1-page sheet that you can use, or I'm going to send you out a guide. And you can use that visual guide to help paint the picture of what the 10 seconds can looks like in your everyday life. The one thing I want to give you the homework assignment of doing is to actually practice. You've got to practice the behavior if it's ever going to become effective for you. So at least 3 times this week or before your next interview, whether it's before entering a classroom, joining a random Zoom call, a family gathering, whatever it may be, take the opportunity to try to read the room and see what you see. You're going to see something. And when you see something, you're going to be amazed at some of the things you begin to notice. And then those things are going to, I believe, whet your appetite to learn and dig more and see what else you can learn as you walk into more rooms and are able to discern what's going on around you. So remember, the first time, it might take you 30 seconds. It might take you a minute. This is your first time or you're early in doing this. Even though technically, I would say that you've probably done this at different points throughout your life. You just didn't have a name for it. You just didn't understand what it was. But you've walked into a room and felt, that's something doesn't feel right here. And that's a version of reading the room. So practice at least 3 times this week. And then the other thing, even when it talks about recovery, one of the ways to never get in that position is to use the PAR framework that we shared with you guys last week. If you didn't learn about the PAR framework, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel. You can look up Foundations, the number 4, Success on YouTube, and you can watch the Translation Gap workshop, and you'll see that there's some great information there that will really help you to avoid the need for recovery unless you pull a David and just stick your foot in it. If there are no questions, some folks in the chat saying they know they have. They've stepped in it as well, so thank goodness. And clearly the other thing I think you're thinking is that, you've had that sense in the room before, that perception that something strange was happening or something was off. All of that is built, it's designed in many of us. Some people in other circles, they would call it discernment. And we all have that sense of awareness. We just have to practice it to get better and better at it. All right, we're right at the top of the hour. Thanks for doing a great lunch and learn with us. I'm David, this is Lynn and Rosetta, and we'll be back with you next time. Don't forget to join us for our final in these 5 sessions where we talk about closing the deal. Not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. We'll all get together one more time for that. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.